Hi everyone, thank you for joining in today. This is Varun Srivastav here. I am based out of UAE and currently lead the threat intelligence function for a conglomerate here. In today's session, we will cover different aspects of intelligence-driven penetration testing, and specifically we will try to understand how traditional practice of penetration testing and evolving cyber threat intelligence capabilities fuse together to produce an enriched output which helps the organizations at both operational and strategic level. We will try to cover the agenda items in next 20 to 25 minutes, and at the end of my brief, I would be more than glad to answer any questions you might have in this regard. So moving forward, what we'll do is we'll go through these particular agenda items, which talk about first of all an introduction at what exactly is penetration testing, a brief idea about what cyber threat intelligence is about, how penetration testing and cyber threat intelligence fuse together to produce something which is enriched and useful for analysts as well as the C-suite who are going to be taking decisions basis the report. Then we'll understand, in depth about how penetration testing is traditionally done. Brief look at, the life cycle of penetration testing. Next agenda item will be CTI core elements, which will essentially look into what CTI actually comprises of. We will talk about CTI lifecycle. We will talk about core elements of CTI, and we'll try to interconnect that with how it could contribute towards penetration testing. Again, moving forward with CTI, we'll try to also understand attack and kill chain models, wherein we'll understand basically how these models contribute towards penetration testing and how we can utilize them better for our own analysis. Going forward, we'll also see how CTI enriches PT in a more effective way. Basis the understanding that we have got in the first few slides, we'll get the context around what CTI enrichment will happen at PT level. Brief understanding of a case study. Basically, we'll just talk about an approach of penetration testing, which will be led by threat intelligence. And in the end, we'll have a deep dive at what PT strategy and what conclusion we should draw out of this discussion. Basically, penetration testing, often called pen testing, is one of several techniques used to verify cybersecurity posture and provide a level of assurance to the organization that its cyber defenses are functional. It is a way of testing defenses against an adversary who mimics a cybercriminal actor. Penetration testing is answering a simple question, basically. What would a cyber criminal do to harm my organization, computer systems, applications, and its network? It is a practice of testing a computer system, network, or web application to find vulnerabilities that an attacker could exploit, simulating an attack against an organization's IT assets. Vulnerabilities could be due to multiple reasons in those assets, a few of them being flaws in a design, usage of insecure network, poorly configured computer systems, networks and applications, legacy systems, so on and so forth. And a very important factor being plausible human errors. So an efficient penetration testing helps in finding the gaps in the security tools that an organization is using, finding multiple attack vectors and misconfigurations. So an organization can prioritize the risk, fix it, and improve the overall security response time. And that's where we'll understand, how our CTI element will infuse further data inside pen test to make it more enriched and effective. Using an intelligence-led approach has long been accepted as a best practice in the realm of conventional security. Without it, organizations will invariably defend against too little because they don't understand the threats they face or try to defend against all potential threats. which is an unsuitable approach that may also impair the organization's ability to operate effectively. For example, a company looking to build a facility in a potentially hostile environment would first seek intelligence on the threat posted by malicious actors in that vicinity, geographically as well as competitively, and before trying to adopt appropriate security controls. ILPT, or intelligence-led penetration testing, is basically a controlled attempt to compromise the cyber resilience of an entity by simulating the tactics, techniques, and procedures of real-life threat actors. It is based on targeted threat intelligence and focuses on an entity's people, process, and technology infrastructure with minimal foreknowledge and impact on operations. What is the purpose of a ILPT in that case? The purpose of intelligence-led penetration testing is to assess and provide insight on entities' resilience capabilities against a real-world simulated cyber incident. Intelligence-led penetration testing should be conducted within a set scope and incorporate a risk management process to ensure a control test that minimizes risk to entities. So this slide will just try to understand the basic elements of penetration testing. And after this, we'll understand parallelly how CTI is defined, and then we'll try to fuse them together. Now, what are the phases of penetration testing? Penetration tester usually begins by gathering as much information about the target as possible. Then he identifies the possible vulnerabilities in the system by scanning, after which an attack is launched, and post-attack, an attacker analyzes each vulnerability and the risk which is involved. Finally, a detailed report is submitted to higher authorities summarizing the results of the penetration test. Penetration testing can be broken down into multiple phases. This will vary depending on the organization and the type of penetration test. The first phase is ideally reconnaissance and planning. The first phase where planning happens is where the attacker gathers as much information about the target as possible. The data can be IP addresses, domain detail, mail server, network topology, etc., etc. In this phase, he also defines the scope and goals of a test, which is very important, and that's what we try to achieve at the end of pen test. And if you try to have a goal and scope properly defined, that kind of sets the strategy for each and every step that goes forward in a pen test exercise. So the scope and goals of a test, including the systems to be addressed and the testing methods to be used, are properly defined. An expert penetration tester will spend most of the time in the phase, which will help in the further phases of the attack. Next step in pen test is scanning. So based on the data collected in the first step, the attacker will interact with the target with an aim to identify the vulnerabilities. So this helps a penetration tester to launch attacks using vulnerabilities in the system. This phase includes the use of tools such as port scanners, ping tools, vulnerability scanners, and network mappers. So while testing web applications, the scanning part can be either dynamic or static. So as you might be aware, the static scanning is where the aim is to identify vulnerable functions, libraries, and logic implementations. In dynamic analysis, it is more about practical way of scanning compared to static analysis, where the tester will pass various inputs to the application and record the responses for that. At this point, now the next step involves actual exploit. This is the crucial phase that has to be performed with due care. This is the step where actual damage is done. Penetration tester need to have some special skills and techniques to launch an attack on the target system. Using these techniques, an attacker will try to get the data, compromise the system, launch those attacks, etc., 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 to check to what extent the computer system or applications or a network can be compromised. And next phase include risk analysis and recommendations. After the penetration testing is complete, the final goal is to collect the evidence of the exploited vulnerabilities. At this step, mostly considers all steps discussed above, where the evaluation of vulnerabilities, present in the form of potential risks is jotted down. Sometimes in this step, penetration tester also provides some useful recommendations to implement in order to improve security controls. And at the final step, report generation is conducted, where the results of penetration testing are compiled into a detailed report, possibly with a proof of concept, which helps the decision makers take appropriate decisions for taking the penetration testing forward. Penetration testing types are based on the position of tester, as defined in this diagram above. So if the penetration test is conducted from outside the network, it is referred to as external penetration testing. Suppose the attacker is present inside the network, simulation of this scenario is referred to as internal penetration testing. Targeted testing is usually performed by the organization's IT team and the penetration testing team working together. In a blind penetration test, the penetration tester is provided with no prior information except the organization name. And in double-blind test, at max, only 1 or 2 people within the organization might be aware that a test is being conducted. At this point, let's understand, how CTI is laid out. So cyber threat intelligence is what cyber threat information becomes once it has been collected, evaluated in the context of its source and reliability, and analyzed through rigorous and structured tradecraft techniques by those with substantive expertise and access to all source information. Like all intelligence, cyber threat intelligence provides a value add to cyber threat information, which reduces uncertainty for the consumer while aiding the consumer in identifying threats and opportunities. It requires the analysts to identify similarities and differences in vast quantities of information and detect deceptions to produce accurate, timely. So rather than being developed and an end-to-end process, the development of intelligence is a circular process in this case. This is referred to as intelligence cycle. In this cycle, requirements are stated, data collection is planned, implemented, and evaluated. The results are analyzed to produce intelligence, and the resulting intelligence is disseminated and reevaluated in the context of new information and consumer feedback. The analysis portion of the cycle is what differentiates intelligence from information gathering and dissemination. Intelligence analysis relies on a rigorous way of thinking that uses structured and analytical techniques to ensure biases, mindsets, and uncertainties are identified and managed. So in cyber threat intelligence, analysis often hinges on the triad of factors, intent and capability, with considerations given to their tactics, techniques, and procedures, motivations, and access to the intended targets. By studying this triad, it is often possible to make informed, forward-leaning strategic, operational, and tactical assessments. So basically, if you talk about key elements of CTI, it would involve strategic, operational, and tactical level of intelligence that is provided to appropriate audience. Wherein tactical intelligence would be actually assessing real-time events, investigations, or activities, and provides day-to-day operational support. And on the other hand, operational is going to be more of what assessment you do for specific potential incidents related to events, investigations, or activities, and provides insights that can guide and support response operations. At this point, if you see the cycle here, it talks about how intelligence need to be ingested, controlled, disseminated, as well as stored in your repositories. So intelligence has to have a centralized structure. The responsive nature of intelligence should be provided to the consumer, which should be clearly having defined reporting lines. Objectives of those CTI elements should be clearly defined and provided as a policy element to different decision makers. Should be systematic, should be able to be shared appropriately with different TLP based classifications to different audience. It should be continuously reviewed because if an intelligence element happens to be older, it doesn't support the cause, where it might be deprecated or it might not be used anymore by the threat actors. It has to be accessible whenever you need. An analyst needs CTI data. It has to be accessible at all times for ingesting into its own analysis, and it has to be timely. At the moment, you get a particular IOC, and before it causes any harm to the infrastructure of the victim, timely information sharing has to be conducted from CTI perspective. Now we'll talk about two major attack frameworks, frameworks for analysis by CTI as well as pen test analysts. First is about attack. So attack is the framework which is defined by MITRE, which is for enterprise. And attack for enterprises is an adversary model and framework for describing the actions an adversary may take to compromise and operate within an enterprise network. The model can be used to better characterize and describe post-compromise adversary behavior. It both expands the knowledge of network defenders and assists in prioritizing network defense by detailing the tactic, techniques, and procedures the cyber threats use to gain access and execute their objectives while operating inside the network. Attack for Enterprise incorporates information on cyber adversaries gathered through MITRE research, as well as from other disciplines such as penetration testing and red teaming, to establish a collection of knowledge characterizing the activities adversaries use against enterprise networks. While there is a significant research on initial exploitation and use of perimeter defenses, there is a gap in central knowledge of adversary process after initial access has been gained. Attack for Enterprise focuses on TTP's adversaries use to make decisions, expand access, and execute their objectives. The 11 categories within Attack for Enterprise were derived from later stages, for example, exploit, control, maintain, and execute of a 7-stage cyber attack lifecycle as defined by Lockheed Martin, which is called cyber kill chain, that we'll also discuss further. This provides a deeper level of granularity in describing what can occur during an intrusion. So each category contains a list of techniques that an adversary could use to perform that tactic. The techniques are broken down to provide a technical descriptions, indicators, useful defensive sensor data, detection analysis, and potential mitigations. On the other hand, the cyber kill chain is a series of steps that trace stages of a cyber attack from the early reconnaissance stages to the exfiltration of data. The kill chain helps us understand and combat ransomware, security breaches, and advanced persistent threats. Lockheed Martin derived the kill chain framework from a military model originally established to identify, prepare to attack, engage, and destroy the target. Since its inception, the kill chain has evolved to better anticipate and recognize insider threats, social engineering, advanced ransomware, and innovative attacks. There are several core stages in the cyber kill chain that range from a reconnaissance, often the first stage in malware attack, to lateral movement, to data exfiltration, and other common vectors that you identify with. Each stage is related to a certain type of activity in a cyber attack, regardless of whether it is an internal or external attack. Reconnaissance is where the observation stage happens. This is where attackers typically assess the situation from the outside in order to identify both targets and tactics for the attacks. Intrusion is where, based on the attacker's discovered information in reconnaissance phase, they're able to get into your systems, often leveraging malware or security vulnerabilities. Exploitation is where the act of exploiting vulnerabilities and delivering malicious codes onto the system is achieved. This is basically done to achieve a good, proper foothold inside the victim's environment. Privilege escalation is where attackers often need more privileges on a system to get access to more data and permissions. For this, they need to escalate the privileges often to an admin or other key role-based access controls which are established on the victim machine. Lateral movement is once they are in the systems, attacker can move laterally to the systems and account in order to get more information. Similar to that, obfuscation, denial of service, and finally exfiltration is where the extraction stage happens and getting data out of the compromised system is conducted. So at this point, we can ask ourselves how basically CTI and PT actually combine together to provide more actionable output. So at this point, if you understand how global security standards are basically laid out, these standards and organizations basically emphasize the need for cyber threat intelligence and threat identification to inform an organization's overall cyber risk identification, assessment, and mitigation program. To successfully implement a risk-based information security program, an organization must be aware of both general cybersecurity risks across all industries, as well as both business sector risks and organizations risks unique to the organization. Furthermore, proposed revisions to multiple standards defined by different certs across the globe emphasize the need for a thorough and complete risk assessment that is informed by possible vectors through which the security, confidentiality, and integrity of that information could be threatened. Threat model is generally understood as a formal process by which an organization identifies specific cyber threats to an organization's information systems and sensitive information, which provides a management insight regarding the defenses needed, the critical risk areas within an organization, and information system network or business processes, and the best allocation of scarce resources to address the critical risks. Even today, generally an accepted threat modeling process involves comprehensive system, application, and network mapping, and data flow diagrams. Many threat modeling tools are available free to the public, which includes threat modeling tool by Microsoft, as well as frameworks like Stride and so on and so forth, to inform the use of general attack cyber vectors that each organization should consider. Generally, between cybersecurity frameworks such as NIST, which is NIST cybersecurity framework, and threat modeling tools identifying general cybersecurity threats such as Stride, an organization can achieve a risk-informed information security program. However, with the increasing amount of large-scale data breaches occurring and with the evolving complexity of cybersecurity threats, many regulatory agencies and other industry-based standards institutions have called for a need to go one step further and understand the techniques, tactics, and procedures utilized by hackers using CTI. By using cyber threat intelligence and other threat-based models, organizations can gain insight into potential attack vectors through red teaming and penetration testing exercise by simulating each phase of a hypothetical attack into the organization information system and determining potential countermeasures that can be employed at each step to the kill chain. For instance, at the kill chain, which involves 7 steps that we discussed earlier and proposes 6 potential defensive measures at each step, which includes detect, deny, disrupt, degrade, deceive, and contain. We should kind of infuse the kill chain model across every step of the PT that we try to achieve as part of the objectives of the organization. Consequently, an organization can layer its defenses along each step in the kill chain to increase the probability of detection or prevention of the attack. This threat identification process requires greater detail on adversarial TTPs. Fortunately, as we discussed earlier, MITRE comes to rescue here. So MITRE attack framework collects and streamlines adversarial TTPs in specific detail and provides information on each technique and potential mitigation features, which includes commonly used attack patterns for each. So if we see the figure here, this is these are some basic elements that how in the end CTI actually enriches the PT, wherein it provides a situational awareness and reconnaissance information, which is focused on the entity by providing threats around the organization, inside the organization, as well as anything that is happening from social engineering side. CTI also provides threat profiles in the form of detailed TTP reports for any adversaries which might be targeting a particular entity. It also helps in simulating real-life cyber threat scenarios with the help of TTP information. Any enrichment on the test plans of PT also has to be added from the CTI perspective, so that if there is a plan that is going forward, which involves, let's say, identifying attack pattern of a particular campaign, that's where CTI could actually enrich the test plan before it is being executed. Evaluation of output with the added intelligence, contributing towards strategic threat intelligence, and providing information to C-suite for decision makings are another elements of CTI, which very much contributes towards a more defined PT. And in the end, the reporting structure as well as the information that comes out of the report to the target audience becomes more enriched. So the intelligence-led penetration testing combines two services basically into one. The first service is about threat intelligence input, which provides current, up-to-date, detailed insight and awareness of threat actors, their attack vectors, and their motivations through available resources. And on the second side is about the penetration testing professional, who is conducting technical assessments of network security and business risk. So we talk about phases. We can talk about three phases that could be combined for an intelligence-led penetration testing approach. First is about phase one, which is basically contextualized, detailed understanding and reporting as to contemporary threats and threat actors that could impact your organization, along with their motivation to do so. Analysts should be able to answer three questions out of this phase one. What are the threats which are likely to target you, and what are their capabilities? Which of your business systems would be most attractive to external attackers? And what is your current exposure to open source reconnaissance? The last question requires an evaluation of a company's digital footprint. So analysts should be able to investigate how easy it would be for an attacker to learn about your company, your network, infrastructure, and processes through examining your social presence, which includes your company webpage, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and other presence that you have. This threat intelligence can be augmented with an understanding of your risk management and compliance requirements. Then we move forward towards phase two, which is used to help define a set of scenarios tied to real threats, which utilizes the tool and tactics of real cyber adversaries that might attack client organization. So in this phase, analysts should perform the actual penetration test as per information gathered from phase one. This involves conducting exercises which are based upon the scenarios defined by phase one and will be conducted in as realistic way as possible. So each test will be perpetrated to a pre-agreed conclusion using defined as achieving a preset level of access into the organization or a specific data system. At this phase, these exercises will include an assessment of relevant portions of the network architecture, technical implementation, capability of detecting and responding to attacks, as well as people and processes responsible for security. And the last phase, the phase three, having completed all the technical assessments of the network, people, and processes, analysts should present the relevant and actionable outcomes in three key deliverables. The first deliverable has to be a threat intelligence report, which provides a backdrop to the testing performed and gives situational awareness to the cyber threat which your company may face. It also talks about the attack test report, and it will also talk about security improvement plan. At this stage, we understand that CTI kind of provides a very valuable information to penetration testing exercise, and in turn helps to enrich data that comes out of a traditional PT report. So there are certain do's and don'ts that are generally recommended for a traditional penetration testing exercise. For example, if penetration testing is not done properly, they can cause a lot of damage. For example, it could crash servers, expose sensitive data, corrupt crucial production data, and so on and so forth. You're also required to trust a penetration tester. So basically, every penetration testing is done by an analyst who has got its own way of doing the test. So that's where the trust in the tester needs to be there. And if you don't employ realistic test conditions, the result will be misleading. These are some essential pen test do's and don'ts that we should have covered while we are actually hiring a company or getting pen tests done internally. People often confuse a red team and pen test exercise. So generally, a red team is more open scope, so it's up to the tester to decide how to approach the test as they learn more about company system. It is also driven by a specific goal rather than a brief to find vulnerabilities. The goal might be to access a certain piece of information that we might be looking for example, like a CEO-based information or sending an email from the CEO, something like that, which is more targeted. So that's where we can say it's about more about open scope in red team rather than a set pattern that we do in pen test where a defined test plan is there and we try to achieve what could be done. In the end, if we talk about key takeaways for a pen test exercise, companies must appreciate what they have got and why it is needed to be protected. They must put in place appropriate organizational and technical measures to ensure that the data is sufficiently protected. At this point, the compliance and other requirements demand of another company, which is it is looking forward to work with to insist upon a pen test. So that's where appropriate countermeasures should be considered by organizations to protect both the data and adverse events focused on data breaches and inadvertent errors, among others, which will help to shape a proper pen test strategy and in turn protect your data. So at this point, I would like to invite any questions that you have, and I would be more than glad to answer them. Or if you have any comments, I would be more than happy to listen in this context. Thank you so much for your time today, and the floor is open now.